So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for everyone joining. Thank you so much for joining us. This is day 4 out of Font Fashion Week. We're super excited to share with you today's presentations. But we start with Wayne, Wayne Thompson, all the way from Sydney, Australia. We're super glad that you're able to make this talk for today and to join us. It's quite late in your evening, and I was just saying before, it's not often that we get to speak with and have chats with designers in Australia, because normally when you are at conferences it's such a long way to travel, so it's not that often that we have these possibilities to come together and talk about type, but today we do. So this is really nice, and the presentation will be sharing a typeface that I absolutely love. So I'm really excited to hear more about the story of how it came to be. So that's it for me. Now let's please welcome Wayne. Thank you so much. And thank you for the attendees as well for joining us. So please go ahead, and I'll come back when it's time for the Q&A.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction, Nadine. You're too kind. Hi, everyone out there. I'm not sure how many of you there are out there or where you're from, with the exception of Tanya, my friend in the chat. Hi, Tanya. I just want to say thanks for taking the time to tune in, and I'll do my best to keep this reasonably short and just cover the most important parts. So in this session, I'm going to give you an introduction to my new sans serif family. It's called Fello, without the W, and attempt to tell you why you should immediately rush out and buy it. At least try to tell you what makes it different from a million other sans serifs out there. And in my humble-ish opinion, I think it's different because it's a hybrid of two sans serif genres. Firstly, I thought I should just at least introduce myself, just to give you a quick bit of a blurb about me. I'm from Australia, which if you're in Europe or the USA is in the future by about 12 hours. It's also in the Southern Hemisphere, where we have really weird reversed seasons and lots of dangerous animals. And Australia's about as far away from everywhere else in the world as you can get, with the possible exception of New Zealand, which is even a little bit further. Now, I live in Newcastle, New South Wales. Newcastle is a couple of hours drive on the highway north of Sydney on the eastern seaboard. Newcastle is a coastal city. It's Australia's largest city, which isn't a state capital. A population of around 350,000 people. I'm lucky enough to be a full-time type designer and typography teacher. So when I'm not working on typography-related projects, I'm teaching typography at my local university. I've been a type designer for a bit over 20 years. And I'm also, unfortunately, at the moment, an Arsenal supporter, which can be very frustrating at times. Could be worse, though, could be Leeds United. Hello to Mike out there if you're listening. Sorry, Mike. So I thought I'd just start by describing the two genres of sans serifs that my font is a bit of a hybrid of, just to give some background and context. The two genres are geometric sans and humanist sans. So first I'll try to explain what each of those is, and let's start with geometric sans. The geometric sans serif was a product of the forward-thinking approach of the Bauhaus era. Constructivist principles characterized by minimal decoration and an adherence to geometric purity led to a series of geometric sanses that kind of represented the zeitgeist of the time, which was around the early part of the 20th century. And these two are fairly famous examples of that. Cable and the font that everybody knows, Futura. So I think that most designers, not type designers, but most graphic designers can identify a geometric sans serif without too much trouble. It's kind of there in the name, the geometry, perfect straight lines, rounded circles, triangles, all of that sort of stuff. A humanist sans, on the other hand, is much harder to characterize. So I'm going to attempt now to explain in a nutshell what a humanist sans is. And the humanist sans serif genre began here with Edward Johnston's typeface for the London Underground Transport System in the year 1916, over 100 years ago. Edward Johnston was primarily a calligrapher So the discipline of calligraphy naturally influenced his type design and naturally influenced Johnston Sands. Now, this typeface has been in continuous use for London's Transport Authority literally ever since, with very few modifications on the way, even through the transition to digitisation. On the right there is one of Edward Johnston's original Johnston Sands drawings. So what exactly does humanist mean? In short, it means displaying influence of the human hand. In other words, showing broad nib characteristics or calligraphic origins. This appears in its most obvious form as stroke modulation, difference in stroke weight as you go around the shape of a character. So if you look at the A and the O on the left from the typeface centaur, you can see that a right-handed scribe with a nib contact angle maybe around 30 or 45 degrees produces thicks and thins as it goes around the character shape, and those thicks and thins betray the tool that that created it. Post Gutenberg, so we're talking around the late 1400s, when humanist scribe styles were dominant in Italy, particularly in northern Italy, this influence found its way into the first metal typefaces of the kind of standard alphabet as we know it today, mainly via Nicholas Jensen, an influential type designer and printer of the day. So these new styles modeled their lowercase on humanist broad nib lettering styles because that was their best reference at the time. But they didn't have a capital letter reference, so they modeled it on Roman majuscules, as in capital Roman letters from roughly 1400 years prior to that, which carried very particular shape proportions. So if you look at that diagram on the right-hand side there, you can see, for instance, that the wider letters like O and N and A and X are based on perfect squares, whereas other letters such as E and S are based on half width of that perfect square. And the reasons we think that the Romans did this was so that they could easily and mathematically calculate the width of an inscription, because when you're carving it in stone, you only have one chance to get it right. So to summarize crudely, humanist types have Roman proportioned capitals and broad nib influenced lowercase. There are more indicators of what constitutes humanism in typefaces than that, but we'll leave it at that for the moment, at the risk of driving everybody to sleep. So in a geometric sans typeface, the A and the G are two good examples. They're based on pure geometric forms, a circle with a stroke on the right-hand side. This typeface is avant-garde medium. And in a humanist typeface, those two letters often are replaced, and this is what I've chosen to do in my font Fello, are replaced with classically referenced forms such as the bicameral or double-decker A and G shapes, which are essentially of calligraphic origin. And the reason that I chose to do this is because I prefer those shapes and I find them more recognizable and legible. And I prefer the flavor that they give the font, and they take some of that hard geometry out of it. Or in the words of Adrian Frudiger, a circle with a stroke isn't really an A. He actually said that. At reading sizes, the geometric A and the G to a lesser extent and some other letters can be mistaken for things like O at very small sizes. And that's one of the main reasons why I prefer those styles on the right-hand side there. So what's the point of all of this sans serif education? Well, in a word, text, using a font in text. Geometrics traditionally don't work so well in long form text for reasons kind of among which are the O mistaken for the A mistaken for an O that I mentioned just now. Whereas humanist sans serifs do tend to work very well in long form text. The problem is that designers love their geometry. And so that's why Fello is a geometric sans with some humanist principles built into it. So this is a typeface that's intended to be a serious contender for text usage. Here's a sample, a more longer sample, so you can see most or all of the alphabet. And the next screen shows you what it looks like in some text settings. So my font Fello currently has 3 weights with more to come soon. I'm hoping to expand it greatly very, very, very soon. This is the full character set, just so that you're aware of the extent to which it's usable. Latin extended to cover all of the European languages, and Cyrillic at the bottom there as well. So this means that this font will support text in any language based on the Latin character set, as well as on the Cyrillic character set. Text settings, though, I mean, I said that I wanted it to be a serious contender for long form text, but you know, that's not as sexy as display typography. So I chose to build some cool looking, what I consider to be cool looking alternates into it as well. And these are some, I just want to now go through some of the features that are in this font that make it useful, I hope, for display design as well. I kind of wanted to give it a bit of a futuristic twist, or give the end user the opportunity to give it a slightly futuristic twist. So these are my favorite ones, the capital M and the lowercase a. Now the alternates that I've built into this, and I'll show you more on the next screen, are definitely not for the faint-hearted, and then they're certainly not intended for text usage. But I found the two-word phrase quirky alternates at the top there, which gives me the opportunity to use almost all of the alternate versions in there. And I've realized from the word quirky at the top there that I forgot to include lowercase k in this screen, which is a shame because I really like the k. But anyway, that gives you a bit of an idea of the kind of how far I push some of those alternates. So I'm really proud of these, and I really hope that you like them too. There's also a set of ligatures built into this. So in case you're unfamiliar, ligatures are an individual character that's used to solve a spatial clash, or you know, some sort of clash between the shapes. They're fairly standard set of ligatures, with the possible exception of the double G, that sneaky double G ligature that's inspired by Mrs. Eves, the typeface Mrs. Eves. If you're not familiar with Mrs. Eves and the double G in it, it has a little ligature in it in which the double G ligature in which the two G's face each other, kind of like a couple. Mine looks like a little pair of goggles, I think. Another feature that my font has is small caps. So Fello includes small caps for extended flexibility in text settings, and you can see them in the words vicious cycle on screen there. Small caps are one of my absolute favorite typographic features, and I doubt any more in the future that I would ever design a typeface that wouldn't have small caps in them, because I find them so valuable. So it's one of my favorite features in fonts, and I'm always trying to find a way to incorporate them when I'm designing with a typeface. So when I'm designing typefaces, I always build them in. One choice that I made during the design was to include old style proportional numerals, but in the standard keyboard positions. So it's a little bit unusual. Most fonts you'll find have the standard lining numerals, the ones at the bottom of the screen there, in the standard keyboard positions. But I tend to find that I'm switching over to the old style numerals more often than not when I'm using other fonts. So I chose with this one to put those ones in the standard positions. And it's kind of an indicator to the end user that this font is designed for text use, rather than necessarily, you know, an opportunity where it might be used for, say, financial documents or anything that requires tabular numbers. So this font is kind of aimed at tech-savvy designers, and I'm hoping they'll pick up on the fact that I put those numerals there. I've included the other numeral set on screen so that you can see them at the bottom there, but Fello actually contains 4 numeral sets. So there's the 2 that you see on screen, which are both the proportional sets, but also there's copies of both of those sets set to tabular widths as well. So that in case somebody does want to use this font in financial columns, it will still be able to do so, and hopefully do so well. So lastly, in this fairly short and sweet talk, allow me to show some print samples of the font in use. Now, Fello, this font actually began its life as a custom sans serif for an Australian university. So here's some of their collateral. There's in the early sort of design phase of it, which gives some context to the sort of Fello story and the story behind this font. You can see in this case, the designers have used it for big headings, but not necessarily the body text. That's their choice. And there's one more sample, lovely big picture of what looks like Bondi Beach. maybe one of the other Sydney beaches. Looks lovely no matter where it is. And I just wanted to finish up by saying thank you. If you are in a desperate rush to get out and buy my font, as I hope you are, go to the I Love Typography website and search for Australian Type Foundry. If you want to see more of my work in any of its forms, my website and Insta are there on screen. I just want to say thanks for listening, and I'm happy to take questions if there are any.
Thank you so much. This is really great to see. Thank you, and really nicely put together presentation and the typeface. So before I start, because I do have a question. So for everyone, if you'd like to ask questions, please put them in the Q&A, because then it's easier for me to get to them. But if you want to just give compliments, just feel free to put those in the chat.
I'm happy to take compliments.
Yes, no, because like in all of the other talks, there's always like all the love and attention coming up in the chat, and then and then I have to go through them and like find the questions in there. But really, it's a great typeface. Really wonderful. I wanted to ask something a little bit technical, because when I'm looking at even the characters that appear as if they are geometric, there is still a sense of warmth to them. There is still a sense of friendliness as well. How do you get that quality? Like, what are you looking at? How do you bring that out?
Look, that's a really tough question to answer. It's
I know, but
yeah, I know. And as a fellow type designer, you will know and understand that you do it and you look at it and you go, well, I'm not happy with that, so you do it again and you look for other ways of resolving that. But I really do think that an understanding of the history that's led us to this point. I'm not suggesting I'm any great historical expert, but the reading in the study that I have done, with, I'd like to make a huge shout out at this point to the University of Reading, which I know that lots of us have studied at, and that's where I got a lot of this historical context from. And I really think that understanding those pathways helps you to do that kind of thing, to know what choices to make through the design process. So in particular, things like if I want this to look a little warmer than your standard geometric sands, which I find quite cold, emotionally cold, almost Helvetica-like. You look for the ones that you go, okay, how can I add a little bit of difference here? And with the knowledge of what humanist has meant in typefaces in the historical past, I think you're in a better place to kind of make those decisions.
But you've also, at some point, the proportions are a little bit wider, no? Than you would typically go for. Yeah, and I think that also gives room to breathe inside the typeface. It feels like you have room to breathe almost in those sorts of proportions, and we see it beautifully in the small caps as well. Right. The width and the spacing.
Yes, that's true, and it's interesting that you raise that point, because that I did. Perhaps I should have put that in my slides. There was, because I talked about the Roman proportions, but I never really showed what the proportions of my capital letters in this font were, unless viewers were looking at it on the screen that showed the whole alphabet. But yeah, I have chosen with this one to not pay specific attention to the Roman proportions. I use them as a starting point, but I find them too extreme. And there's lots and lots of examples nowadays of fonts that balance those widths more. They're not necessarily all the same width, but they balance those widths more for flow and ease. And that's another example of knowing that history, because if you know the reasons why, or what we think the reasons why the Romans did it were, which were largely for mathematical reasons as opposed to, say, legibility, then you're in a better position to make that judgment. You go, okay, well, I'll start from this point, but I might widen, the things like the E and the S are more kind of like the dimensions of something like Gotham, for instance, which is much more balanced across its capitals set.
Nice. So again, another reminder, if anyone would like to ask any questions, you can please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. So Robert is asking, or saying first, I like that you're including small caps, makes the fonts way more worthy. Is there also a German capital sharp S? Yes,
there is. I always would include the S set as part of the the character set, because you can't reasonably be expected to sell a font to Europeans without including that character, I think.
Yeah, good. Okay, so while we're waiting, I have a couple of other questions from just about the alternates. Like looking at the typeface in its like default form, you get one mode of expression, and then you switch on those alternates, and you've jumped almost into the future, right? With a very like distinctive expression. So what was it in particular that drove the choice of the structures, you know, of the part? Like, why is the M like this? Why is the, you know, the N like that? Like, what sort of reference did you have in mind? And what particular like adjective would you give to that expression?
Or I don't know what adjective I would give to it. That's very difficult, other than it's almost like it's like a nod to the hard geometry of the geometric sans, but in a different way, with these really kind of hard, sharp angles and straight lines there. In terms of references, I had seen some fonts in the past that did a similar sort of thing, and I'm struggling to remember the names, and I can't remember, like these things are kind of in my head, this kind of general look of things without there being specific ones. Although I think there's a font called Max, M-A-A-X, that I've seen somewhere in the past that, if I remember correctly, had a similar-ish kind of treatment to some of its alternates, one that I'm a big admirer of. But mostly it was just me experimenting around, and then at some point making a decision, okay, do I want to go in this really futuristic direction, or do I want to go in a text direction? Why don't we try and find a way to go in both directions within the one font? And that's kind of the point of alternates within the OpenType code. It's a worthwhile question that you ask, because I do worry that they're a bit extreme compared to the rest of the character set.
But the thing is that it's not the fact that they are extreme. What I like is that they feel convincing, even though the structure is not one you would expect. And so, like, I always say that when we're designing typefaces, you have this rubber band, which is public expectation of what the letters look like. And we can like pull and pull and pull, but it cannot snap. When it snaps, then we've done something wrong, because the reader will stop and like, what is this, you know? And in this typeface, it almost like it's opened a door to a space which is interesting looking without snapping that rubber band, you know? That's why I'm asking about the alternates, because at the beginning of Font Fashion Week, so when I gave the first talk, and I was talking about, bringing the human back into design. And that's why I'm so happy with this typeface as well, because like it's basically, it's almost like I gave the brief and you made it, but I know I didn't, and you did it in any case. But basically, it's the same thoughts, I think, you know, in the consciousness of designers these days, that you know, we've lived too long in the coldness of the geometric sans serifs and the grotesques, and with branding projects taking on the same style every time, everything starts to look the same, and we lose the humanity in all of that. And so it's really nice to see this coming alive. But it's also really nice to sort of nod that yes, we can bring the human, but it doesn't mean it's going to be conventional. No, we can bring back the human, but we can still experiment and bring that curiosity into new forms and new structures, and finding that you know, extra door that will lead you to a new design space and a new typographic expression. That's why I'm so happy with the typeface. But anyway,
that's very nice of you to say. Thank you very much for that.
No, you're welcome. You're welcome. No, I don't give compliments, by the way. I only say what I think. So if I don't say anything, it means like I don't have anything nice.
That's really bad.
Yeah, it's like interesting.
I'll keep that in mind for future.
Yeah, good. We do have a technical question from Robert. Can you maybe describe how you will extend the weights now? So like, yeah, what are the future plans in this? You know,
my process for extending weights is changing all the time, but the general way, the usual way that I do it is that I start from the regular weight, and then I expand outwards in both directions, both lighter and bolder, from the regular weight, because I think the regular weight is the one that's most likely to be used in text. And so you kind of need to make all of your main decisions at that weight, I think. And my process now have got light and bold, and I would like to go extra light and maybe thin, and I would like to go bolder as well, maybe up to extra bold and perhaps even black. And I will simply take the weight that's closest to that one, and I just literally do it manually, character by character, using a STEM calculation formula. So it's based on some, who was it? It may have been, I'll probably be getting the name wrong, but I think it might have been Lucas de Groot who created the formula of non-linear stem widths as you go lighter and and heavier. Don't quote me on that, because I'm not convinced I've got that name right, even though Lucas is a great guy and super talented. So yeah, there's a formula that helps you to sort of calculate those kind of stem widths, and I just establish it in one primary character of one of the rounds and one of the straights. So in the capitals, it might be capital O and capital H, and work heavily on those two until I establish what those formulas are. And then I can simply measure the stem weights and the horizontal weights and apply those weights to the entire rest of the character set, not in an automatic way. I still have to do those outlines character by character. It's just a manual process.
So, but are you, because Robert is asking, and I also want to ask the same thing, do you, like, now you have the bold, will you go draw the extreme and interpolate, or are you going to draw every single instance?
I have used interpolation in the past, and I have created a small number of variable fonts, but nothing to a commercial level yet. And I'm still a little bit on the fence with creating variable fonts. When I'm talking to my corporate clients who ask me to do custom type work for them, I'm always trying to sell them the variable font solution. But the problem that we inevitably come up against is that they want to use the font in some system that doesn't accept variable fonts yet. Sometimes it's things like broadcast software or software for broadcast design or things like that. And so I've found it very difficult to sell the variable font solution to my clients.
Yeah, and branding, I would expect this to continue to be the case for many more years. Because there's reasons why it would be a little bit complicated to, explain all the instances inside the design branding manual.
Yes, and until support
get
for
non-designers to understand which instance they have to use.
That's right. And until support for variables is universal, then I think we're still going to have that problem. And even when it is, there's an education process for users of fonts to understand how to. I have students, and I even know some professional people that are still unaware that there are variable fonts in their font menus right now. Such as the the Adobe ones that that they put in there for testing purposes. So I think there'd need to be an education process. So yes, Robert, to answer your question for the moment, I'm just drawing those extremes manually. For the moment, there are some shapes that repeat throughout a typeface, and once you establish them, you can expedite that process a little bit. But essentially, it's just a manual process still for me.
Amazing. So we are getting towards the end of our talk, but I do have a question for you. When you first had the idea to draw the typeface, what was the first letter that came to mind?
I always start with lowercase n and lowercase o, universally, regardless of the brief or what I'm hoping to achieve. It's always N and O for me. I'm very much an adherent of the Matthew Carter method. It just doesn't seem to make sense to. I mean, there has been times when I've drawn other letters, fairly early in the process, but I really need that N and that O, or in the sense of capitals, capital H and O, to establish those basic parameters. How thick are the stems? How thick are the horizontals? What's the nature of those curves? And those primary decisions really do flow almost all the way through the rest of the character set.
Interesting. And that alternate M and the alternate G, at what point in the design process did they come in? Like, was it early on in the design, or was it halfway or towards the end? Like, I'm just trying for the conception of it. It would be interesting.
I think the idea was there for them in a cloudy kind of fuzzy manner right from the start, but I focused on the primary text-based nature of the font at first to say, let's create a nice solid font that can be used in text. And once you have those parameters, then you've got a better idea of where the extremes can fall if you want to change some of those letters. So I think I remember fairly distinctly, I had a few work days in the middle of that process, somewhere in the middle of that process over the last year or so, where I thought, okay, this is the day where I'm going to work out what to do with those alternates. So you put all that conservative stuff aside, and you just say to yourself, what's the, how can I really mangle this thing? How can I make it totally fall over?
Now we play.
Yeah, so you know what the extremes are, and then you can say, okay, somewhere between that extreme that's too extreme and this one that's too conservative, let's pick somewhere in that point and say, this is the shape that I'm going for. And you draw it and you stick it in words and you have a look at it and you make your decisions based on that. I was actually pretty uncertain about a lot of those alternates, particularly the lowercase g with the square boxy kind of top circular part on it, because it's so difficult. You put it in the context of other characters and you go, is it good, is it bad? I just don't know. And I'm sure this is a process that all creative people go through, and at the end of the day you have to make a decision and you have to say, this is what I'm going to go with, and I'm just fingers crossed and hope for the best. So yeah, I'm really glad you liked
there's
it.
a moment of like that the leap into the dark, that's you take a leap and we'll see. Now, I'm really looking forward to see how the typeface will be used. It will be nice to watch its journey.
But there is another thing about that alternate G. Actually, I noticed that Mohammed had just posted a comment about really liking the alternate G. I remember now that you may have seen it. People that know about Futura may have seen this. That you can look them up. There's some drawings of alternate versions of the lowercase g in Futura, some early ones, and the one that I've got has some kind of references to that alternate Futura lowercase g. And when I think back in 1927 or whatever it was, can you imagine what the reaction to a letter shape like that would have been at the time? And even now it's a little bit weird, but 1927, if you'd put that out and say, hey, here's my font, imagine. But yes, anyone out there that's listening to this, as soon as this is over, go and look up alternate Futura letter forms or something like that and see if you can find them, and you'll immediately see what I mean.
Yeah, perfect. Good. So thank you so much, Wayne. This has been fascinating. Really wonderful to see the journey of how you came about designing such a typeface and the thought process behind. And I was asking quite a lot about those decisions because this is such a fascinating design, and it's not often that we get the designer to be able to tell us what they were thinking. It's always the thinking and the story behind the typefaces that are really fascinating, plus the typeface itself, obviously. So thank you so much. And thank you for everyone who is has joined us today. Thank you for people who are watching after, and those who are watching live on Facebook now. So thank you for everyone. Thank you so much, Wayne, and good evening to you. Hope you have a nice evening.
Thanks for having me, Nadine, and ILT.
It's a pleasure.
I'm very, very proud to have the opportunity to talk about it.
We're very happy to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.